Hi, my name is John Hedrick, as Father introduced me, a parishioner of St. George Magella. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you guys. I just feel very honored and also privileged to be able to talk about this subject. It's a subject very near and dear to my heart. Scientism. And I'm not talking about science or scientists. I'm talking about a philosophy that we have to be very careful of and be very wary of. So what I'm going to talk about is, what is it? Is it a danger? What danger does it pose? And what do we do about it? So that's really what I want to present to you. All right, a little background on me. I'm a cradle Catholic. That means I got baptized within 2 weeks of birth. I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. I married my high school sweetheart 52 years ago, and she is an Irish Catholic, and that means very Catholic. And we had our first baby 9 months and 6 days after our honeymoon. Now that's Catholic. That's Catholic. All right, I have spent 50 years in the so-called STEM industry. I didn't know what it was called a few years ago, and now it's called STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. That's been my whole career. I also feel very confident in the areas of religion and art, because I've spent a lot of time on parish councils, school boards, acts, all sorts of marriage encounter where I've been involved with religion. And I'm a kind of a self-proclaimed amateur photographer. And I like to use Photoshop and so forth to satisfy my art bend. And I would like to tell you something about photos nowadays. Don't ever believe a photo you see on any place that just printed. Photoshop can do wonders. Okay, so enough about me. Let's get into something that's very important. Have you ever had "I don't believe in God" experience, personally? I don't believe in God. I have had that with my children a couple of times. "I don't believe in God, Papa," especially one grandchild. He's come around. But I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe in heaven. That really scares you. Scares you. Well, it happened to me. I was in college. In college, I went to Rolla. I majored in physics. I went there on a football scholarship. Physics and football, physics and football. How does that really work together very well? Well, actually, it's not bad, because I was a free safety. And if you see a 240-pound tight end running down at you, you got to think, how fast do I have to go to make that collision come out okay? So I did learn a little bit about the physics in the football arena. I had to give it up after the second year, because studying at night was very difficult. If you know math, an integral, well, single integrals became double, and double integrals became quadruple, and I just could not focus on all the math I had to understand. So I gave it up. But I graduated from physics, and I went into computers. But during that physics curriculum, I had special problems. And it was in 1966. I knew it well, fall of 66. And in the spring of 66, this article came out in Time magazine. It's called, "Is God Dead?" Now, that was the 60s, but this professor in the special problems class I was taking, he used it. He kind of brought it up. He actually convinced us there was no God. He talked about some things in physics that don't have causes. No cause, maybe there's no God. He actually convinced me, almost. In fact, I had to go to confession. I went to confession. I really was hurting. I said, "Father, I don't understand this. I'm doubting my faith in God, that there is a God." We sat there and talked a long time, and we finally came up with a scripture reading. "What does it profit of a man to gain the whole world and lose your immortal soul?" So I was thinking, well, what does it matter if I learn all about the world and universe, and if I lose my soul? No, I don't want to do that. So ever since then, I have a little different phrase I use. In the light of eternity, what does it matter? So It got me through. Came out of that, and I'm stronger in my faith, stronger in my religion, and I felt like that was a big learning experience. So my I don't believe in God moment went away. All right. Then, a few years ago, I came across this Pew Research report, and what it was researching is why don't children go to Mass, go to church? And the Pew report said they don't go to church or Mass, for the most part, because they don't believe in God.
And then what year was this?
This was about three years ago, 3 or 4. It's kind of an evolving thing. So a Pew report came out, and I looked at it. It said this, but they also went a little further. They asked, why don't they believe in God? A nice thing to ask. Found out that in school, a lot of them were being taught that science was the root of all knowledge, the truth. And religion was nothing but an emotion. So they lost their faith in schools. And this was not only college, this was high school. Back in the middle schools, they were finding out that they're losing their faith because of this philosophy. I took that report to my associate pastor at St. Gerard's, and we looked at it, and we said, is this real? Well, he decided to do a little interview with the Public School of Religion folks, and guess what? Yes, they do get that kind of philosophy taught to them in the schools. Talked to the Catholic school teachers in St. Gerard's, and yes, they've been exposed to it too in their studies. So it really took us back. We got something here that's really solid, but we have to overcome this. We have to turn this around. Well, turns out I started doing some research, dig into it. I dug into it and found out what it's called is scientism. And you can tell scientism by a couple of symbols. The one on the left, obvious, there's no God. The one on the right kind of surprised me. That symbol on the right is what those who don't believe in God, who are subscribed to scientism, they wear that on their lapels, and that's the symbol for atheism. See the A in there and all the little electrons going around the atom, or the planets going around the sun, however you want to interpret that. So, wow, I found out. So then I started researching what is scientism. All right, well, I've come to this conclusion. Scientism is, their precepts are, science is the sole source of truth. Sole source of truth. And religion is just emotion based on fairy tales. That's basically what scientism is. Now that's what kind of scared me. We have something really to fight. All right. So you can recognize scientism by several things. First, you can trigger their if you get to talking to somebody with scientism in their minds or as their philosophy, the triggering mechanisms are, well, you advocate prayer to solve a problem, and if they go ballistic, no way, they kind of put that off. That's a good sign of somebody who has got the scientism on the brain. Or you mentioned the devil is a real threat. The devil is not real to them. So you can trigger them. You can get them really stirred up. The attitude is, if science says, don't question. That's how they think. If science says it, don't question. They have sweeping claims. It's settled science when they want to win an argument. Well, this is settled science. You can't argue with this. Or the scientific consensus. All the scientists that they've talked to, which probably is not a whole lot, but their consensus is this is the truth. So that's how you kind of know. That's how you kind of recognize scientism, I have found. All right? Well, let's talk about science is settled just for a brief second here, brief moment. Can science be settled? Can science be settled? Well, I've been struggling with that question since I've learned about this scientism thing. What is it? Can science be settled? How can you refute that? It's science settled. Well, then in March of 2020, this year, 2 months ago, this article in Scientific American came out. It says there's a cosmic crisis. And if you look at the fine print there, it says, how fast is the universe expanding? Scientists can't agree. And that's a problem, they say. Wait a minute, I thought the Big Bang was settled. They're arguing about the Big Bang theory and all the intricacies of that. And all of a sudden, I got my answer. Settled science is probably the wrong way to put it. I mean, again, the flat Earth was settled science for centuries. The universe revolving around the Earth was too, but those turn out to be wrong. And so many things in science where you start talking about settled science and they've got the answer, you got to stand back and say, well, the answer may be bigger than that or more or different than that. All right, so the question is it dangerous? Is this scientism thing dangerous? Well, I'm going to talk to you about two different subjects, climate change and the spiritual creation, because these are two big ones. I'm going to make one statement. I'm not for messing up the climate. I'm not saying that. We should not be. So this is not about the natural climate change is going to happen. It's just about how scientism has essentially influenced the decisions in that particular subject. And of course, a spiritual creation, do we have a soul? So I'm going to talk to you about these two different subjects to kind of illustrate scientism, identify it better. All right, so let's start with climate change. Our religion, or a lot of religion says, change is inevitable. It's God's creation, right? It's God's creation. God made us stewards of his creation to protect it. So he wants us to protect it, but he definitely has built in a change mechanism. Scientism says what settled science is Earth's climate is doomed by CO2. And science says world will end soon if we don't halt CO2. And climate change deniers are evil. They don't care about the Earth. So there's the real argument, I guess. Let's consider some climate change prognostication. Dig into a little bit. This is a prognostication by a Harvard biologist, George Wald. Civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. Second, we are in an environmental crisis which threatens the survival of this nation and of the world as a suitable place of human habitation. That was by Washington University here in St. Louis biologist Barry Commoner. Now, I have a question for you, a little bit of audience participation. When do you think those statements were made? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
40, 50 years ago.
Somebody's been around. You all agree with that? Yeah, Earth Day 1970. That's when those two statements were, and a bunch of others, if you look them up on the internet, were made. All right, what was it all about? Global freezing. We're going to freeze the globe. We're going to make a big ice cube out of it. That's what we were going to do. All right? Well, it didn't happen, did it? The results were it didn't freeze, like they said, in 20, 30 years, or even in 10 years, some of them were projecting. So a guy up in Canada, his name was Michael Mann, came up with this curve. And you notice it starts at 1000 AD, and it goes all the way to today. And it shows a nice flat temperature curve of the Earth. Suddenly it takes off in this century. Now, the United Nations, IPCC, they call it, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Control, adopted it. They said, yeah. So it indicated global warming, right? Well, in fact, they called it the hockey stick for a reason, because Michael Mann was Canadian. What happened, though, was a guy named Tim Ball at Penn State took the same data and came up with this curve. You see the similarities? No, right. This is data unmassaged, unalterated in order to get the curve that Mann wanted. And in fact, Ball called Mann a liar. Mann sued Ball, and Ball won the case, and now they're still trying to settle that case up. That's how long, this was in the late 90s. So this was the beginning of the global warming syndrome. Here's another curve. I don't know if you can see all that back in the back, but this is starting in the year 2000 BC, going all the way to 2000 AD. So the little yellow area over there is what we're talking about. But you notice the temperature, what they call temperature anomaly, far back, it's pretty high from that temperature standpoint, or pretty low if you want to look at the anomaly. And they actually, this is kind of minus 32 degrees is what this, minus 31, minus 30. They were comparing it to the Jurassic period of Earth, and that was very warm. So our Earth is, at this point in time, is minus 32 degrees lower temperature-wise than it was in Jurassic period. This is some pretty good people here, too. We're talking about NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, American Meteorological Society. They put this curve together. Again, it doesn't really jive with the global warming thing that we were talking about. Another thing that kept coming up was the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations. Well, they kept projecting that if we don't take immediate action, drastic action actually, now the world's doomed by, they started off with 75, then 85, then 90, 95, 2000, all the way to now it's 2030. If you heard about it's going to be all, we're going to go to the end of the world's coming in 12 years, that's where that comes from. That's why they say we got 12 years, because the IPCC said it. It's going to be 12 years from now. All right. So, so what happened was global warming, they started doubting it. So they changed the name of it. Instead of global freezing or global warming, they called it anthropogenic climate change, anthropogenic. Put a big word on it, I guess that makes a difference. That's man-made climate change. That's what that means. Well, is there an ACC catastrophe coming? Well, according to the scientism folk, it's settled science. It's coming in 12 years. There is a consensus among scientists that it's going to come in 12 years. But that projection, that prognostication is based on a climate model. In fact, 38 climate models altogether. And those climate models, some of them they've tried to verify, and unfortunately they've been verified with dubious data sets. For instance, one data set they used was in the ocean. The satellites were measuring the temperature of the ocean. Okay, they measured it here. They were also taking evidently ships that plow the high seas have to record temperatures on their intakes. Temperatures were higher. Well, instead of trying to figure out why, they threw these numbers out, used those numbers, which biased the model. And there's a lot of other things too that have biased the models, but that's one of them. Not to mention a lot of the temperatures they measure are around hot asphalt parking lots. And that kind of does tend to bias the temperature up. All right. The other thing that they didn't do in some of the models is is take into consideration all the real factors that could affect the climate. And the big one that seems to be missing in every one of them is the sun. You know, that thing that glows every day, that, you know, the diurnal, as they call it, the diurnal temperature difference between day and night. In the desert, it's 65 degrees. Around here, it's like 20 to 30 degrees. You don't think those kind of swings aren't going to affect the climate? So again, the models are what is in question. And in fact, this is the University of Alabama in Huntsville. They put this chart together. And they took all the models, all those squiggly lines, they plotted them all out, the projections, and they took what they were able to find in real temperatures, either as measured or inferred from like core samples and things like that, and they came up with that flat curve in the early 2010, like 2012. And anyway, they found this big difference between the two. Discrepancy, this doesn't jive. That created a lot of the, wait a minute, what's going on here? The temperatures aren't panning out according to the models. All right, here's another one from, this one's a little more, let's call it friendly to real science, friends of science. They plotted the same data, got the same results. There was a big no match between what the models said and what was actually measured. So, and they concluded, after looking at some of the sun situations going on, that it's really the sun that's causing this change, these changes in our climate, not you and not CO2. Now, again, I'm not speaking for them. I don't know if I'm not trying to say they're right or the other ones are wrong, but this is what the data is showing. So, is it settled science? Is it really settled science according to the scientism folks? That's the really question. That's the danger. If we believe the world's going to end in 12 years because of the scientists said, and yet the data says it may not, and the science is not settled, what are we going to do? Well, if you look at what the scientism folks say with climate change, they say don't question the science, don't question it. Save the earth. That's what their message is. They also say abandon oil, beef, milk, airplanes for the global good. And they also say they want us to adopt global regulations. They want us to have a one world government that takes care of all this. Now, when you hear the word one world government, what I have found is that what they're really talking about is global atheistic socialism. That's what I found. I mean, that's my findings. That's what they're talking about. So we got to be careful. There's danger here. What's the church say about this? Well, during the global freeze in the early 70s, Pope St. Paul VI now referred to this concern as a tragic consequence of unchecked human activity due to an ill-considered exploitation of nature. Humanity runs the risk of destroying it and becoming, in turn, a victim of this degradation. Now, that was referenced in Laudato Si by Pope Francis. So Pope Paul was, again, in the global freeze hysteria, our concern was, you know, taking it seriously and say, hey, we got to be careful here if we're going to destroy the earth. So the church was accepting that philosophy, I guess. Now, in the Council of Catholic Bishops in 2001 put this out. We make no independent judgment on the plausibility of global warming. Rather, we accept the consensus findings of so many scientists. The consensus findings. So we are adopting this, and you're also referencing the intergovernmental panel on climate change by the UN, which has had its difficulty in making accurate predictions. So, and that was 2001. Well, to today, I know Pope Francis put out a very good encyclical. I read the whole thing, went through it, tried to make sure I understood what he was trying to say, and then by and large, 99% of it was right. Take care of the good of your home. Take care of the earth. Take care of the poor. Take care of the forests and so forth. The only thing he did say in there was there's a very solid scientific consensus that indicates we are presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. And in fact, they even start inventing this term, I should say, positing this term called ecocide and ecocide. Ecocide is where governments or big corporations essentially destroy the earth.
Like suicide.
Yeah, they're destroying the earth. They are laying it waste for, again, profit is how they put it in there. The other is ecocide. If we despoil the earth, we're guilty of ecocide. So this is what the church is talking about right now. Is this, I have to question right now, danger-wise, is this science before religion? Are we really in that mode now where we're letting science lead our good moral and good religious beliefs? I don't know. It's the danger I keep thinking about when I talk about this. And the other thing I keep talking about is I keep listening, and I'm on Twitter with the Sisters of Mercy, some Jesuits and some other organizations. Not all, not all the Sisters of Mercy, but what they're saying is, if you look at these two charts, they're saying is the science is settled that there's going to be global warming, but is this not a violation of the 8th commandment? Because this is the truth. It's not settled. I'm not saying it's not going to get warm or not going to get cold or it's not going to be damaged, but the science is not settled. So if you say that, you really have got to stand back and say, whoa, it's not correct. It's not a correct position. And is that bearing false witness? I don't know. I'm posing it as a danger. All right, so we have to hang on. Let's step back for just a few seconds here. We are called to be good stewards of the earth. I mean, that was one of the very first part of Genesis. We were told to be stewards of the earth. Here, take care of it. Take care of it. Go forth and multiply, but take care of the earth. So we're not saying we should despoil the earth. We should just be careful there. And Laudato Si, as I said, I think really does a great job of defining the common home we have, that why we have to take care of it. Because people can suffer if we don't. And our people can be in big trouble if we don't. This implies we must know about his creation, doesn't it? We must know about it. So to me, that's the true purpose and role of science. If we adopt that, we have to adopt this. We have to learn more about his creation, how it works, what happens when you put something in the ocean and it's not supposed to be there. We need to investigate. So yeah, we're called to be good stewards, to learn about the earth and take care of it. So bottom line, is scientism in this climate change discussion dangerous? Only if you don't question, only if you accept the scientism folks saying this is going to happen, or this is what we have to do to mitigate the problem. And that's where we have to be careful. That's where it's dangerous. All right? So I'm going to leave that subject lying there, not answered actually, but just posing the awareness of it. With the next one is spiritual creation. All right? Scientism says it doesn't exist and there's no proof, there's no evidence. Spiritual creation. Well, everything in spiritual creation is focused on the human soul and the human mind. That's the creation God made. Does a human being have a soul? Well, is the basis for spiritual creation? Well, scientism denies this. They say physical only, no spiritual nature. Now I ask myself, is this at the heart of pro-abortion? If you don't accept the soul at conception, then it's just a glob of cells and you can get rid of it. Is this at the heart of why people accept abortion without question? Okay, what about the human mind? It's just physical, they say, the scientism folks say. It's just chemical and biological. No spiritual nature whatsoever. No spiritual nature exists. Is modern psychiatry a problem? Because they treat a lot of the physical with medicines, but they really don't understand that. I've been told, I don't have a scientific basis for this, but 80% of our thinking and our being and our mind is spiritual. Because they can't explain some of the things we do, some of the things that happen, unless we've got to have something else there. The human mind versus the animal brain, okay? Let's talk about a little bit about that. The relative physical size and physical activity is similar. It's very similar. So how do you explain brain activity? Again, this back to the soul. Appreciation of beauty, humor, understanding time, a sense of morality, capacity for wisdom and love, desire for worship of God. How do you explain those if it's just same size and animals don't do that? Well, the other thing that you have to understand is, does size even matter? Does size even matter? I'm going to talk to you more about a personal experience now. This is about my boy, John David. He was born in early 1974, and he had a very thinned out brain. He had what they call hydrocephalus, or they used to call it waterhead baby. So he had a very, very thinned out, and what they told me at the time, he wouldn't know our names, he wouldn't know us. He'd be better off dead. To this day, I think they were suggesting that we terminate his life. They didn't come out and say it. They were going that way, and I said, no, we're gonna fight for his well-being. And we did. We did some physical things, put a valve in, and by the age of 3, the boy was considered normal intelligence, even with a very thinned out brain. So does physical size really account for the human mind? Personally, from my experience, no. The soul does, the spiritual side of things. So that's my offer as far as what the mind is. We have to understand that God created the universe. He also created the spiritual creation we have, that we know and love. Other people don't. He did it with the breath of God. He just breathed, and there was Adam. He snapped his fingers, and there was the universe. So he did it. There's no space, time, there's no end. It's immortal, our souls, the spiritual creation. But they're saying there's no evidence. Well, I say there is. If you look at miracles, I have to say that I am convinced my son, John David, was a miracle. He wasn't supposed to be able to think, do anything, but he did. And he was prayed over by a lot of people. And as a result, he became a very normal boy. So miracles happen. You can talk about many miracles. The ones that have occurred to me recently that are really solid in my mind as evidence of a spiritual creation are the Eucharistic miracles, where the bread and the wine is changed into, not just changed into real flesh and real blood. I witnessed it in Portugal, and there's 155 different church-approved Eucharistic miracles where the bread and wine has been changed into real flesh and real blood. And in the ones they've tested, the blood is the same blood type, the flesh is the same muscle of the heart in every case. And this is across the world. So that's evidence And you go on, if you ever take a look at the Shroud of Turin and really study the science behind it right now, you know there's evidence that that is a spiritual event, a spiritual artifact that God has given us to, again, as evidence of spiritual creation. I've been to Lourdes, I've been to Fatima, we've been to Guadalupe. In Lourdes, the miracles there are documented. In Fatima, the miracle of the sun, you can't deny that because the secular press published it. And in Guadalupe, the tilde is still there after 500 or 600 years. So there's evidence that there is a spiritual creation. It probably, you know, I was in physics. I studied physics, and I studied the atom. I never saw it. In physics, you don't see those things. You can't, they're too small. You only see indirect evidence of it. So yeah, it does fit the models, it does fit the equations. So the theory has been proven to the satisfaction of science. But even as we saw before, the Big Bang we thought was settled science, it's even being questioned. Some of its scientific facts. All right, and I have to go on record that the Scripture is not a fairy tale. There's too much evidence that it's real. It was a real Jesus. There was a real apostles. They wrote it. They documented, and it's a document that's just as good as any other document in the world that describes a person and events. So it exists. Spiritual creation exists, guys, and scientism denial is dangerous for our children, is dangerous for ourselves as well. We've got to overcome that danger. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just want to point out there is a book that Father Huber likes, and I do too now. It's called Science and Religion, The Myth of Conflict. I would say get this, because it goes through the church history of science versus religion. And the answer is no, the church is not in conflict with science. In fact, a lot of scientific discoveries were made by priests. The Big Bang Theory, for instance, a priest was part of that team that came up with the Big Bang Theory of the universe. So I would say get this book, read it. It's very good. It goes through all the details of that myth. The other thing, if you want to do, I got another book I've given you in my bibliography. It's this book right here. It's called Science Before Science. Anybody wants to really delve into it, this is a deep dive. It goes into quantum mechanics. It goes into a lot of very deep physics and so forth, and talking about it. So good books if you want to read it. This is a hard one because it really goes into some details. This is very good as far as the Catholic Church. So I just want to point that out. There's some good resources. And Father's given out a bibliography that at least the ones that some of the key documents I've been using. So how do we combat scientism? Well, first you use your brain's spiritual power. We have a very powerful brain and mind. Let's use it. You got to be a settled science skeptic. Whenever somebody says that, settled science is just not the attitude we have to take. We have to be always questioning, because the universe and God's creation is infinite, and we have to understand that. In fact, Pope Benedict came up with this statement to advocate theology. What is theology? Well, you start theology with a very simple phrase: I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. If you believe that, then you've gone a long way to being a theologian. That's what you believe. That's what theology really is. But he said the demand for a scientific method is not sacrificed when theological research is carried on, both in religious, in our word, documents of the church, the magisterium, and other people who get involved. So Pope Benedict was saying that they're not incompatible. theology and science. So we have to understand that. Now, let's get to education, because that's how we started. Found out that we have a problem in our schools with scientism. Well, in the schools right now, there's one of the big emphasis is called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And the idea is to promote and educate everybody, not just people who have a bent for that, in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math. So it's kind of a curriculum-wide integration of thinking in all curriculum in the schools. It's intended to promote application in the real world. Now, my question is it infected with scientism? Is STEM, as taught in schools, infected with scientism? Well, what about the spiritual? What about the spiritual nature of man, which is far and above the physical? Well, I want to advocate this today, and because St. Gerard's has it, St. Joseph's has it. It's called STREAM. Add religion and art to STEM, and what do you get? STREAM. Science, technology, religion, engineering, art, and math. We throw in the spiritual a little bit more there. And they do things the same way, trying to develop thinking, good scientific thinking, good scientific methods, but also in the context of religion and art, and to advocate that throughout the entire curriculum of the school. So this to me is a good thing. We want to strengthen it. It's a good thing. So I consider that kind of like God-centered STEM is STREAM. God-centered STEM is STREAM. It's the bridge between religion and science, which is theology. And again, as I said, theology starts with, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. To me, it's got to be an integral to our religious education and formation. We've got to bring God into the picture. In fact, I kind of like to think of I've always, actually a nun in high school taught me to do this. Think of science in terms of the awe of God when you study it. Wow, he really got that straight. That's really big. That's really, infinite. Wow. So integrate the awe of God in science is what I'm advocating to fight scientism. To finalize this thing, let's expose and fight scientism, gentlemen. Adopt STREAM in schools. Let's put theology before science. Let theology lead science, not the other way around. And let's put the awe of God back in science, and I think we'll make some progress with our kids, with our guys who are really involved in the STEM and the STREAM programs. Thank you very much.